Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to attend our presentation. There's 4 of us presenting. Well, there's actually 3 of us in the room. Our colleague Sonia couldn't be here, unfortunately. She's got food poisoning. So we've got her slides and we'll represent that here, no problem. So I'm Paul, it's Hayley, Ilania, and we'll be talking about modernising the workplace and primarily about diversity, equity and inclusion and our approach to that at SUSE. We all have varying roles. I'll let everybody introduce themselves. My name is Paul, as I said. I'm an organisational psychologist in-house at SUSE. Hayley and I work together. And Ilania, what area do you work again?
Commercial operations analyst in rail operations.
Yeah. So I'm non-technical. And it's a great team, and we've got, we'll be taking you through today a whole raft of areas with respect to DE&I. So I'll kick us off and get us started. So diversity, equity and inclusion. Together, these 3 words are often like talking about sex, religion and politics at the in-laws' Christmas party. Yeah, you might get a reaction, might not be the reaction that you're after. Indeed, if I was to go around the room, I'm pretty confident there'd be a range of views with respect to this particular topic. And quite rightly so. At times, we, those who work in the field, have not done the best job of leaning in to some of the discussions around DE&I, especially when it comes to the tech industry. When I tell my friends and people that I meet, the area that I work in, the immediate reaction I get is one of surprise, disbelief, and sometimes ridicule. Mate, have you become real woke? You're a straight, white male. What do you know about DE&I? And what does any of this have to do with work anyway? Oops. Clearly I don't know how to work the slides. I get it. Ironically, the answer to the why question is the exact reason that I feel so privileged to work in this area inside SUSE. This is one of the remits of where I work. And it's a privilege to work in that space. You see, despite all the rhetoric and noise around DE&I, it is not a new idea at all. It has its roots back in the human rights movements of the 1960s. At a time when segregation was normalized, Martin Luther King dreamed of a day his children would be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by their character. Sometimes segregation is not so overt, but it's built into the fabric of society. That is until people like Germaine Greer come along and question those norms and start to write a new narrative about what women can or cannot do. The reality is that individual differences are often demonised or taken as a fact until change is forced. Andrew Sullivan recognised this when he fought for gay marriage. Understandably, this simple act changed minds relatively quickly and would be a catalyst for acceptance of non-traditional relationships. When it comes to work, most people just want an opportunity to contribute. This is what led to a group of camp counsellors spearheading changes in law that led to the Americans with Disabilities Act opening the door for millions of people to be able to contribute to the world of work. None of this history is particularly divisive. None of it is particularly controversial, even if some of the historical figures are. Where it becomes polarizing, and when polarization occurs, is often when we start to talk about diversity. And we talk about mandated quotas and ratios, which are often the focus of DEI policies. Diversity, measured by ratios, will invariably give rise to various questions. Is gender the key focus? What about ethnicity, race, age? What about deeper questions of social class, privilege? And if you have an alternative view to any of this, do you threaten being called racist, sexist, ageist, xenophobic, or cancelled? Trying to hit prescribed markers leads to some difficult and complex debates that not everyone in the field is necessarily equipped to be able to engage in. This can lead people who have alternate views feeling unheard, becoming disenfranchised with the whole notion of DE&I. Issues such as the gender paradox and its impact on STEM careers, the validity or lack thereof of the implicit bias test, and the general political football between various fractions leads to camps forming. The driving force of a fair workplace and greater participation is then lost in the debate. So what do? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. And it will be interactive. We're going to have questions, we're going to have time for questions, and there's a whole area where we will talk about it. But for us, we recognise that it's complicated. There are real issues to discuss and real debate to be had. Requires deep conversation and respect for multiple views on this topic. It is solvable. Solvable does not mean perfect. It means a world where people understand the importance of changing lives. The right of everyone to realise their potential. And the responsibility of companies to understand and contribute to the societies in which they operate in. I work in this field because I believe in a better world. No matter how challenging it is, no matter how challenging it is to have the conversations, to stand up there, to front some of this stuff, it is a challenge worth leaning into. I understand our time in history and the small steps that we can take to make the world a better place for everyone. I work in this field as I come from a country that was the first to give the woman the vote. I saw my father and my brother go head to head with the police in 1981 to protest against the Springbok tour. And I have seen first-hand experience of the impact of work on offenders and reducing recidivism. And with that, I will pass the mic to my esteemed colleague, who will explain how we at SUSE have taken foundational ideas around DE&I to establish our unique approach to this issue.
Thank you, Paul. Esteemed colleague is the politest thing that Paul has ever called me. I have prepared lots and lots of flashcards because I'm a little bit nervous, and I'm now probably not going to take any notice of any of them and just talk to you. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Hayley Blake, and I have the absolute pleasure of working in SUSE's Culture and Talent team, leading employee engagement and DEI. Like Paul, I'm privileged, I'm not woke, I'm a straight, white female, and I am extremely honoured to be able to work in this space. I care about it for my child, my 17-year-old daughter, for the rest of my family, and I genuinely want them to live in a world where they can be accepted just for who they are, regardless of their neurodivergence, their sexuality, their gender. I want our children to live in a society where they can just be authentic, and that's my driver. It extends to my job. I genuinely care in people being treated with respect and fairness. It's so important to me, and I strive really hard to develop our culture, which is already a fantastic open culture, into one where everybody can bring their very best selves to work every day. So that's the first one I didn't look at. Thank you, Paul, for bringing the origins up to DEI 2.0. Today I'm going to talk about how SUSE is responding to the next evolution of DEI. First of all, DEI, it means different things to all of us. Diversity isn't doing the right thing. Equity isn't always fair to everybody. And inclusion is not about being kind. These are bigger topics than that. It's a complicated topic, as Paul said. It can be polarising. Everybody has different views. It's fast-paced and it's emotive. But at SUSE, we try to progress this journey through every conversation that we have, through trying to understand and respect each other's differences. We've been running a kiosk this week and it's been brilliant. I was quite nervous. I've never been to SUSECon before. Can be a bit of an introvert sometimes. We've had the best conversations. And whilst we'll look at SUSECon in terms of gender diversity, we all know we need more women in the room. But what I can say from a diversity perspective, I've spoken to people from so many different countries where I know very little about their culture and their backgrounds. So there are a number of different ways that we can look at diversity. We all know it's impossible to get it right every time. And that's because we're all unique and it means very different things to all of us. So for us at SUSE, we have 2,500 people in over 30 countries. There will always be things that we disagree on. So we focus heavily on creating an environment of respect where we can debate, challenge, and be open with each other. Openness is our business, and I genuinely feel that whilst it's not perfect, it's never perfect anywhere, openness is absolutely at the heart of our culture as well. We try to apply a consistent framework to our DEI principles, and we continue to learn and evolve and learn from the actions that we take and learn from our collective experiences in a safe, psychologically safe environment where we can have those conversations, tell people when they've got it wrong, and we learn and move on. We believe that our ideal framework is right for our business and right for our people. Okay, so here's the framework. It's called IDEAL, as you can see. Inclusion, diversity, equity, accountability, and leadership. Our business model is based on openness and meritocracy. To keep us authentic, openness is absolutely critical to our culture, and we really embrace diverse inputs from our genuinely global team to help us achieve the best possible results and be the best that we can and perform as best as we can for the success of SUSE. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. To do all this, we have to create belonging. People can only be their best and perform at their best when they feel that they belong. And we only do that through psychological safety and an environment where people trust each other enough to have open conversations. When we reach that, we're at the point where we really are bringing our true selves and our authentic selves to work every day. And that's, of course, when we do our best work. So by bringing that environment of psychological safety and trust, we ultimately reach a genuine environment of inclusivity. And that's why inclusion is the start point of the IDEAL framework. Putting inclusion before diversity is a slight shift to how a lot of companies do this, but we do feel it's right for us. Why is that? Because starting with diversity generally will place the focus on particular demographic groups over others, and that, of course, can cause conflict between people. It also forces a company to take a position that its employees definitely won't consistently support, but they might not support at all. And we only get inclusion through genuine employee engagement. One of the reasons why we put inclusion first. When we put inclusion as the foundation, the intent is to unite people, because we all want to be able to be ourselves. We all want to know that we can debate, discuss topics in a mature way, knowing there's no repercussions of doing that. By doing this, we give people ownership to tell us what they need from SUSE, and we therefore encourage a really strong global dialogue where we learn from each other and act on that learning. So as we deliver inclusive engagement activities, we always try and consider, is this the right environment for people to thrive and be their best? And are we offering a solution that's equitable for people? So when we look at global campaigns, we look at how we can do them on a local level. We look at how we can reach people in different time zones. We ask people on site to adapt things so that it's right for their specific audience. We know there is no one size fits all. So we're pulling on lots of people who are doing this, one, because they care, two, because we have a great group of people who all lean in to help each other to try and find the right solutions. There's no one or two, three, four people doing this. There's a whole group of people, many of which I've had conversations with in this room this week. This takes us to the next pillar, which is equity. Our focus is on equity, not equality. I think the world has moved on from equality, and here's why. Equality won't count for different needs and different barriers for success. So just for complete clarity for anyone who's not familiar with why we would use equity over equality, equality means every one of us in this room gets a pair of shoes. Equity means we all get a pair of shoes that fit. And hopefully they're Manolos and they're really nice and I can chuck the trainers out the window when I go home, but that's a different story. As we address equity, we also have to consider intersectionality. What this means is, as human beings, we are not one-dimensional. We are all multi-layered, made up of a different set of experiences, backgrounds, and there are a lot of things that we don't necessarily know about each other just by looking at each other. So, for example, by looking at me, you wouldn't necessarily know if I have a religion. You wouldn't know if I have a hidden disability, what my ethnicity is, or my social class. So we're working in an environment where we have to try and figure out how do we meet people's individual needs if we don't know what they are. So we have to try and find out what they are, and the way that we do that is through creating an environment of trust and psychological safety where people feel able to say, hey, this is what I need, this is what's important to me, and this is what will enable me to do my best work. By focusing on inclusion as the foundation and equity as the guiding principle in terms of how we hire, develop, promote, retain, reward, recognise, engage. Lisa will know a lot more things in the HR space that I've missed there. The natural outcome is ultimately stronger diversity, which is our third pillar. And we continue as a company to strive for more diversity. We want our employees to be ambassadors. We want people to say, this is a really great place to work. We want people to tell their graduating kids, take a look at this company. And we are the strongest ambassadors as employees. And the people that we've been talking to, if we've got partners or customers in the room, we've been sharing about our culture, which I think is a genuine culture. We're not just paying lip service. There's two more pillars. Accountability. Accountability is, of course, the success factor. As I said before, this has to be owned by everybody. No single person can do this. We are all accountable for our behaviours and our actions. And of course, last but of course no means least, leadership is the driving factor. Consistent role modelling by our leaders ensures absolute clarity of expectations and alignment on how we behave and collaborate for success within our open culture. This is Paul's baby. We launched this recently in Amsterdam, but it's an important one just to touch on very briefly. If you have any questions about this, it's Paul, not me. This is our leadership model, Coach, and it really supports the ideal framework. When you look at this, some of those words, some of those behaviours on there are very generic, and you would expect to see them on any leadership model. So clarity, commitment, quite typical. You'd be very surprised to see leaders without that kind of expectation. But it's far more unusual to see such a strong focus on openness, humanity, and authenticity, all of which we absolutely expect from our leaders at SUSE and hold them to account. So this is where we are trying to align the work that we do around DEI across every single people framework. So this is a really important one. Just because a programme isn't calling out DEI specifically, it doesn't mean that it's not being considered in the development. And this is really important, that this one is there, and we think about openness, authenticity in how we operate and how we expect our peers to operate, and of course being humane and showing humility to others. This model is equally relevant to everybody at SUSE, whether they're in a leadership role or not. Thought leadership, diversity of thought is really, really critical to our culture and our success, and really helps us to continue to shape the narrative around DEI and continue with our progression. So how do we deliver? There are 8 key focus areas of which we're driving DEI programmes through all of them. You can see there's a lot. It touches every part of the employee experience, and it's a lot of work, hence why we need to bring people on board to help us with this journey. As I said, when we're bringing people on the journey with us, we also invite and really encourage people to support us with decision making. So we've recently launched Ideal Committee, and that's a voluntary role that a number of our employees have stepped up to, where they're going to help us define metrics, define and deliver our goals across all of these key focus areas. When we look at these kinds of committees, obviously we're looking for diversity within that group, so we get the representation from people and we get a really broad understanding of the topics that matter to people, regardless of their own personal circumstances. We also have 6 employee resource groups at SUSE, which are so strong in helping us raise awareness, education, and create allyship. You don't need to be part of a community to support it. As I said at the beginning, and Paul said, this is about creating a better world, which I think we would all support if we see so much hate and conflict in the world, where we can make a small difference to make our environments at home and work better, then that's all for the good. And we have brilliant people in our ERGs who work tireless above and beyond their day jobs to really, really drive these programmes. DEI for SUSE is really woven into our values and culture. It is genuinely not an effort or a tick box exercise. It's something that so many of us care about. We're going to move on to hiring bias. Sonia. We deliberately didn't change the slides because Sonia had prepared the slides and we wanted to make sure she was fully represented today, but Paul has very kindly volunteered to present these slides on her behalf. Thank you very much for listening, everybody.
Thank you, Hayley. Yeah, and Sonia, I mean, when we were talking before, when we put in our submission to SUSE, it's pretty rare that HR gets a slot inside SUSECon, so it's great to be here. And we, at the time that Hayley and I put in our submission, we didn't realise that Ilani and Sonia had also put in a submission, and then we all came together for this presentation. So, as I was saying before, Sonia has food poisoning. She didn't get it here, just want to make that clear. She got food poisoning before she left. So I will try and do justice to her presentation. Now this one's interactive. So what I want you to do is, I want you to have a look at these slides. And for each of these people, I want you to come up with a story. For each, I'm not going to ask you about the story, but I want you to look at the woman, top right-hand corner, the gentleman, the bottom left-hand corner. I want you to have a story for each one. I'm going to give you a moment there. I'm not going to quiz you. I'm not going to ask you about it. What is their story? Now, the point of this exercise is not the story that you come up with, but it's the fact that you can come up with a story at all. Your brain will naturally draw conclusions. I'm not getting into biases or what those stories might be. They're your stories. But the reality is that we meet people and we create stories. We can't help it. It's how our brains operate. We have mental models. We have schemas. If we didn't, it would be impossible to navigate the world. We understand that this is a chair, that this is a table. We have these impressions. Now, when it comes to hiring, the key is understanding how we create those stories and how those stories may colour the information that's coming back to us. Because what we're trying to do is make informed decisions about selection on the right criteria. Job-related, skill-related, potential-related, team-related, manager fit-related criteria. Sometimes our brains can get in the way of those stories. You know, and sometimes these are some of the stories that we will tell ourselves. So we'll look at that resume and we see somebody who's overqualified for that particular role. We come up with a story that they're going to be here short term, that this is just a filler for them. We see someone who had a higher previous salary who's now taking this role. Again, we come up with a story as to why that may be the case. They've had employment gaps. We see those gaps and we go, why is that the case? They haven't had industry experience in this particular space, that they're going to be incompetent. They've had frequent job changes, that they're a job hopper. Now, the reality is that just as we saw with this slide, with all of these particular components, they are individualized. We don't know that story because we don't know that individual. Our brain is trying to make sense of the world. It's trying to create meaning, and it's trying to do that very quickly. So it creates stories, but that individual's story is far richer. And those stories can stop us making the right sorts of decisions. It's not that people often want to be biased. It's not that they're doing this deliberately. I think a lot of people are, and just as Hayley was saying before, we've been incredibly encouraged by the conversations. Never expected that, having the stand at SUSECon. But the types of conversations that we've had over the last 3 days, people coming up, wanting to discuss things. People genuinely want to do the right thing. They want to understand what the right thing is. And so it's understanding how some of these biases come about, these mental models that we have. We might have stereotypes, but they may not be stereotypes so much as our own previous experience leads us to certain assumptions. It's understanding individual variation is always greater than in-group variation. Our brain is always working only off the data that it's been represented by. But individuals are incredibly rich and incredibly deep with respect to that. So how do we overcome some of this? Firstly, it's about awareness. It's about awareness of how these mental schemas work. How do these models work? They are filters by which we interpret the world. Information comes in, we're not seeing this objectively, it goes through a filter. Once we're aware of that, then we can identify what are the certain types of filters that you have. If you've come from this particular background, if you've been exposed to these types of ideas, what are those ideas and how do they happen to play on you? And then once you've got an identification, you can begin to mitigate it. And then you can improve. And we improve because we want to make better selection decisions. And so this is the type of thing that we do at SUSE to ensure that we make the right types of selection decisions. If everybody can begin to understand how these biases come about, that it's not deliberate, that it's just how you're seeing the world, you identify your own ones, everyone's different. And you recognize the impact that that has on making the wrong decisions. It might be about age. You know, this idea that somebody coming in who's of a particular age group has this particular story. You're imposing that story rather than hearing their story. It's hearing that individual's story will help you to make better selection decisions. So that's just a snapshot of how the work that we do in terms of ideal, where the rubber meets the road, where we turn the theory into actual practice. How this really impacts people's lives is a far more interesting component, and that's what we're going to move on to now.
Our final section, I'd love to introduce you to Elena Rodriguez Souza, who is going to share her story around diversity in action by way of a Q&A. So I'm going to be asking her the question, and she's going to share her story. So Elena, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to hear your story about creating spaces where everyone can thrive and learn together, regardless of their background.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here because I want to share my story. I think my story highlights the importance of opportunities and access. Just as an introduction, when I grew up in a small island in Spain. You might know this place is called Gran Canaria. My mom, she was a single mother, and we used to live with my grandmother. And our resources were a little bit limited.
Thank you. Can you tell us more about your educational background?
Yeah. In 2009, I started an amazing journey. So I got into the university, but then the economic crisis hit the country and my mom lost her job. So I couldn't continue my journey. We didn't have the finances to support my studies. I was forced to go for a higher certificate in finance instead, while working part-time to cover my expenses and support my studies.
That's tough. What happened next?
What happened next was that after a few years, I felt that the conditions in Spain were keeping me locked in. So I decided to move to Ireland with the goal of learning English. And the option for me was working as an au pair, so I could keep having an income, so I could cover my expenses there. And my plan was clear. It was going to stay for a year and then go back home. But you know what? I've been there for 7 years now, so my plan didn't work.
And what made you decide to stay in Ireland?
In Ireland was way easier to find good opportunities to develop my career, and of course the salary was better compared than in Spain.
Yeah. How did you choose your career path in Ireland?
Initially, I started to work as an accounts assistant, but for some reason that never felt right to me, and a friend of mine, spoiler alert, he's my husband now, told me that I should change my career and start a career in data analysis, for example, due to my technical skills.
And how did that work out for you?
Honestly, I never thought that could be an option for me, because for me the tech industry was like a men's club. So with exceptional grades, very into computing, and there weren't too many women in the field. Due to the lack of representation, I never saw myself in that area. And also when I was growing up, I never got any information promoting the work of women in science, technology, math, engineering. So of course I never saw myself in that area.
So what made you reconsider?
I decided to challenge that assumption, so I used part of my savings to go for a diploma in data analysis. Oh my God, you cannot believe it, but it was tough because we were only 4 women out of 30 people in that class. Of course, imposter syndrome appeared, saying, hey, you cannot do this, you shouldn't be here, just run away, just quit. So it was really tough. But in the end, I decided to stay, and I loved it, and I ended up doing a postgraduate diploma in financial analysis as well.
Amazing. So, SUSE, how did you come to SUSE?
It is an interesting story because thanks to that diploma, I applied for a role here, and my previous manager at SUSE, she saw potential beyond my experience as an accounts assistant. So she saw transferable skills like financial knowledge, organizational skills, attention to detail, my willingness to learn and start a new career and be part of a team. So she gave me that opportunity, and I will always be grateful to her.
Brilliant. So what's happened since then?
Since then, it is interesting how it affected me, that new role. I was able to support my mom financially, helping her to pay part of her house. And honestly, for me, that is a clear example of how opportunities can impact individuals' life, helping them to make choices without the economic pressure. I think when a company fosters diversity, helps employees to grow financially, personally, and professionally. So, of course, that will help to support their families and their communities, creating a ripple effect of positive change.
Amazing. Can you tell us some more about your experiences at SUSE?
Since I started to work for this company, and this is not because we are at SUSECon, I became a more confident person, and the main reason is the networks that we have in the company, especially thanks to Women in Tech, mentoring programs, Pride at SUSE, neurodiversity. Those networks pushed me out of my comfort zone, and you might not believe this, but 2 years ago, when I had a video call and I had to introduce myself or explain any project, I was not able to do it. I used to forget my name, get super stressed, and today I'm here thanks to my mentor who has helped me to improve my public speaking skills. So,
you should be immensely proud of yourself. Considering the audience we've got with us today, what would you like them to take away?
I hope I've been able to share the importance of having networks in the company, because they create a sense of belonging, sense of community. We all have to remember that we are all different. We come from different backgrounds. We have different stories. And in my opinion, meritocracy falls apart when we assume that everyone starts from the same baseline, which is not the case. But on the other hand, meritocracy comes alive when we create opportunity, especially for those who are not likely to have them, and when it's part of the company's commitment to create a more fair and equitable society. So thank you all for listening to my story. And yeah, I think this is the opportunity for Q&A and share your story, or just tell us about your initiatives in your companies. So thank you all.
Thank you, Elena. Anybody have any questions, feedback, comments? Yeah.
At least I know when I was up there in that space yesterday, they could have. Is it on? Is the next question? I guess so. You mentioned earlier in your 8-sector circle of bringing the experience of DEI into everybody at SUSE, that the presence of employee resource groups and measurement were both in that circle. Are the employee resource groups themselves evaluated and measured as far as their performance and effectiveness in, like, outreach or activity?
Katerina, would you like to answer from Women in Tech? Because that's our most robust one, so I think she can give a brilliant response to that.
Whenever you have people in volunteering positions, especially in like philanthropy or nonprofits, if you start measuring them, they become really disheartened by what you believe they can accomplish. And they can refuse or find different priorities in their life for volunteering. And so what SUSE's approach is they keep track of what the employee resource groups do, and we contribute every month to documentation and tell them about the different events we're running, how many members we have, so that those efforts can be further amplified to our stakeholders or the other community. But otherwise, whenever we have ideas and whenever we have more time, we have an opportunity to ask for those funds or those resources, but we're never pressured to perform beyond our capabilities.
Thank you.
That's a good question.
That was a great question. Thank you. Thank you both. Brian.
I know many companies in the tech industry use websites for filtering hiring pools. Can you make any comments on SUSE's use of those or not use of those? I don't know whether we use them. I'm not in that position, so I'm just asking about it because I've seen that. in the industry, and I just wondered if somebody would just comment about their view or just comment about it in general.
Lisa, do you mind? I know some of the things they do, but my answer wouldn't be very comprehensive.
I'm going to get the joke out the way already. I am standing up. From a hiring perspective, we have an ongoing challenge in trying to diversify our pool. So we have started using more sites to try and get the job ads out there to different audiences. I think the place we've got to today is that we've realised we've got more work to do in how we rewrite the job descriptions. So it's not enough to get out to those sites. You really need to reframe the job description as well in the job ad. So there's an example, there's about 50 different sites that we use across the globe, but it's not enough. And yeah, so that's the next step, is to look at the language we're physically using. I think that one of the other challenges is that the problem is the pool out there is small. And so to some degree, you're going out to these other sites that are theoretically getting eyes on the job ads. I'm not convinced it works. I think there's more work to be done in, number one, growing our own internal pool. How do we get people to move laterally within the organisation to a role? And I think that's probably the easier piece of work. And then number two, how do we find more Elenias out there outside of SUSE and help them grow in? But all of those things have to happen in parallel.
I think just to add to that, I think there's a lot more we could do with selection. So one of my passions is neurodivergent people and the barriers that they face when it comes to interview. That's basically, you know, they can be brilliant employees, absolutely brilliant, but they're not necessarily going to shine at interviews. And I think there's a lot we could do to enable people in the interview process to genuinely shine, not feel like they're being tripped up where they really can't tell us, you know, how they could succeed in the role. I think we could do some work there and really, really hit untapped talent and in terms of neurodiversity.
Yeah, our talent acquisition team is all over this stuff as well. And so just building on what Hayley's saying, they're really hungry for some of the methodologies around this to avoid any bias, but also understanding how those sites are working, how the applicant tracking systems are working for bias. We know of some of the issues for certain companies that have tried various things to automate it and the biases that have built into that. I think that is potentially a bigger problem as until AI gets right.
I think people have placed too much emphasis on those sites. I don't think they're as effective as we originally hoped. I think that's the...
I think it's 4:25. What's this final session actually called, Dom? Do you know? That's it. I'm sure people want to get to that. So from the three of us, thank you so much for listening to us today. Thank you.